We're all friends, you know that.
Of course we are.
Let's see what I want to be today. Where's my virtual background? Here we go. I'm Airport Frank.
Virtual background, that's good.
Well, if you saw into everybody's houses and basements and offices, they're not all equal, so.
Yeah. Actually, I'm in my basement music room.
Me too. I have a radio down here.
Yeah. I've got my here. Let's see if I can show you what I got down here.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, I hurt my thumb doing something, so I don't know what I'm going to do in my musical instruments for a bit. But okay. There's my piano, my saxophones. I got a flute there, guitar. You see it all that?
Yeah.
A lot of instruments.
Uh-oh, you just knocked something over.
That is just my lamp so you can see everything else better. I'm relegated to the basement with this so I don't disturb upstairs.
Well, the new trend I just heard on national news this morning is the housing market, they're getting away from the open concept. Everyone is looking for houses now that have 1 or 2 offices and quiet rooms where they can conduct meetings such as this.
I'm not surprised. Now that everybody opened up their house, why not?
Yeah, yeah. It's the way of the future.
It probably makes sense. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to be in a separate room.
Yeah. Hi, Jeanette.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, Malcolm, what's going on with you? Anything?
Same old, same old. You know, nothing of great interest. So, trying to go to Italy in September. We'll see if that works.
Well, I hope you can.
What part of Italy are you going to, Malcolm?
Well, we usually go to Tuscany. Sometimes we go to other areas, but we have friends there that we stay with and stuff like that. So, but I don't know. I mean, you know, with all these travel restrictions, we'll see whether we go. We have the reservations to go. That doesn't mean we're going. So.
Yeah.
I'd give you the address of my uncle, but you might not find him. But years ago, a friend said he was going to Italy. And I says, oh, jokingly said, I said, take a picture of the town that I was born in when you're on the way. And he said, what is it? And I told him. And I said, I still have family there. And he said, where do they live? And, you know, he got back from Italy about a month later and he called me into his office. He says, come here, I got something for you. And you see the car driving down the highway and the sign of the town where I was born in. And I said, gee, Pat, thanks. He said, sit down. I got more. He found my uncle's house. He went to the door and says, hi, I'm a friend of your nephew's in Chicago. They invited him in for coffee and cookies. They had the best time. I was so happy to see that. That was good.
It's the nature of Italy.
Yes, I love it over there.
We've made friends over the years and we go and visit with them. And we had a gal come and spend a semester at Maine West High School. She lived with us. So we're still talking to her 4 or 5 years later and studying art in Florence. And she lives in Bologna. She wants us to come up and see her. So that's it.
I would give it a few more months, if not 6 months.
I'm worried that you know, my wife went ahead and made the reservations, but I don't know if it's happening.
Yeah, it's still active over there. I keep in contact with relatives all the time, and it's still an active situation. So I don't know if you went there, you might have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's my big fear. Yeah.
And then coming back, you'd have to quarantine for another 2 weeks. So there goes your vacation.
Yeah,
What kind of paranoid?
vacation.
We're kind of paranoid. Not only we're not going to go to Europe this year, but we're not going to Florida yet either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
Florida's
back to
hotter.
California.
Florida's got problems right now.
Yeah, we were staying in the house of a friend in February. We got back and the quarantine started, all that stuff started. We were there about a week before it all started.
Uh,
My goodness. That's probably the last time we go to Florida for a while.
All right.
All right, are we getting towards the time? No.
No,
5
not quite. We still got 5 minutes.
9 minutes. Well, I'm hearing a few more airplanes, so it sounds like it's slowly recovering. For a month, I heard almost nothing.
Good morning. Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Mayor.
Is this going to be our last Zoom meeting? I hope.
If anything goes right, yeah. I just hope everybody doesn't start getting sick again.
Really interesting storylines.
I'd like to remind everyone if you could mute your phones or your devices.
We still have 2 minutes.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Ernie, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
This is Mission Launch Control.
Where's Major Tom?
Or ground control.
Ground control, right. Okay. I'm calling the meeting to order. It's the Fly Quiet Committee meeting Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020, which is a Zoom teleconference beginning at 9:30. Jeanette, will you call the roll, please?
Sure. Bensonville,
Principal here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
Des Plaines,
Here.
Elmhurst, Harwood Heights, Niles,
Here.
Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Here.
Schiller Park,
Here.
and Wooddale.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, very good. Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the May 26, 2020 Fly Quiet Committee meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Hey, real quick, Joe. I know it's annoying and I'm going to regret saying this, but the new guide, if we're following Open Meetings Act, all video votes have to be roll call votes,
Even minutes?
even minutes and adjourning.
Oh, God.
All right.
All right.
I'll
Thank you for the information.
Yes, thank you. So I'll do the roll for the meeting minutes. And Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove, Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is ONZC member committee comments, if there's any. Here, what's that?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Frank Ikas from City of Chicago, 41st Ward here.
Okay.
At the last meeting that you had, I brought up a point about reducing airport noise by asking the CDA to shift flights towards the shoulder hours, and you said you would take it under advisement.
Yes.
I wonder if you could tell me the results of that.
I don't have an answer yet. I will get it to you though as soon as I have one. Okay.
Okay, can we expect at any time, a specific time, or just open-ended time?
Well, I mean, there's certain things I don't have control over, right? So I can't say you're going to get it next week or even tomorrow, but you are going to get it as soon as possible.
Okay, and I don't need a definitive answer, just a progress.
Yeah.
See what kind of progress we're making on it. It would benefit everyone at this meeting and everyone at all the meetings if it were proposed and at least thought about.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
All right,
welcome.
we're moving, I'm sorry, what? Nothing? Moving to number 5, alternative B feedback discussion. Is that you, Ryan?
It is.
Okay.
Let me pull up my screen. Well, good morning, everyone. So first off, let me start out with our usual where we are as far as progress. Can everyone see this? Jeanette, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. So again, usual slide, we're still in the developing the alternatives. We are in the process. At the last meeting, we went over one of our first alternatives for discussion, alternative B. And we subsequently met with the majority of the committee members to get their feedback on that alternative. And so this alternative included a lot of the comments that we've received thus far in our meetings and a lot of the feedback that we've gotten. Let me change the presentation mode here really quick. All right. So the Flight Quiet 21 proposal for alternative B was a 12-week rotation, departure vector headings only. This was utilizing full airfield, meaning north airfield, south airfield, and the crosswind runways. We had 2 departure headings per configuration, and we had that the schedule broke out into 8 parallel weeks and 4 diagonal weeks. We've met with majority, like I mentioned, the majority of the committee members between the last meeting and today. Actually, up through yesterday, we had meetings. And so on this slide, I'm giving a bit of a high-level summary of the comments we received. The vast majority, pretty much everyone, was in favor of the alternating north and south airfield concept. Everyone was generally in favor of 2 departure headings per runway with some specific exclusions. There was also comments that in regards to intersection departures, if it would be possible to have full-length departures be the default every night, and then air traffic use intersection departures if there's an operational need. The comment was, or the thought was, during the overnight hours, there may be plenty of time during the night when ground traffic is not significant enough to warrant intersection departures, and they could use full length. There's also received comments about the configuration schedule itself, not necessarily change configurations, but how the iteration of the configurations are in the schedule to avoid consecutive impacts to communities, which was a great comment. Regarding RNAV, some say they're in favor of seeing RNAV in a future alternative. Others say they do not want to see RNAV, but most of those communities were speaking specifically for RNAV for runways that impact their communities. So I think we're still going to move ahead with a future alternative that would include RNAV. There were concerns voiced about departure impacts overlapping arrival impacts. This is something that has been brought up before and discussed when we have arrival runways that are straight in, and then we have departure headings going out that pretty much overlap these same communities close into the airport. And if there's a way to address that either through the schedule or the configurations and departure heading concepts to help avoid back-to-back impacts on some of these communities. And then the crosswind runways, there was concern with the utilization that we've seen thus far in the interim flight quiet program. Again, with these runways in the schedule, there is a bit of less predictability when it comes to how many aircraft are using the runways or able to use the runways, and aircraft being moved to east-west runways more often. And the issue of the long runway, when we are scheduled to be using the crosswind runways, because they are some of our shortest runways, what runway would we need to also have open to accommodate those aircraft that can't use those runways? And so the question is, are the north airfield runways sufficient enough to handle those aircraft? That is a question the ONCC leadership has posed to the FAA, and we're waiting on their feedback as to what their thoughts on north airfield only as far as long runway. And there was also comment on the CDA's willingness to completely close the South Airfield on nights when we are scheduled for North Airfield runways to force the utilization of those runways, meaning that the comment was not to have, let's say, runway 10 left, 28 right, or 10 center, 28 center open all night so that they're open if needed rather than close them, the CDA close them, and then only open it up if there is some operational need and a request made by the airline. And then the last comment we got, or one of the comments we got, was a request to exclude the diagonals altogether and proceed with development of an alternative without those runways included. That is something that we can do. However, we cannot do without the committee as a whole requesting that because right now in the established criteria for this committee, the criteria that we're using to develop alternatives, those runways are specifically identified to be included. So if this is something that the committee wants or wishes us to explore an alternative just to show a comparison of what a flight quiet program may look like without those runways, we can do, but again, we would need the entire committee to, or at least the majority of the committee to request that. Okay, are there any questions on the feedback before I move on?
All right.
Okay.
Are we going to additional runway now?
Yeah, so I'm going to move on to our runway configurations that we've been talking about for some time. So we have these 30 runway configurations, potential runway configurations that we believe are feasible for a future flight quiet program. The 30 configurations, out of the 30 configurations, I have highlighted in purple those configurations that were included in alternative B. So we have 6 configurations here that we've used. We still have 24 that we have not looked at in an alternative. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the remaining 24 configurations and specifically some a handful of configurations that I refer to as hybrid. And a few of these have some caveats that I want to make sure the committee understands what they mean. So in orange, we have these configurations, again, that I refer to as hybrid, meaning they have operations on both the north and south airfield. And I'm bringing these up because the majority of the comments are in favor of the remaining north airfield and south airfield split. So we're concentrating on the north and the south. And these also, another characteristic of these particular configurations is the use of a diagonal runway and a parallel runway. So all these are either diagonal and parallel with those caveats. So these specific configurations are a little bit more complicated for those 2 reasons. And so one of the caveats here that we've got from air traffic is what they refer to as visual only. So if you'll see configuration GG and configuration, oops, I lost it, at HH are required to be visual only. And so I want to talk about what that means so the committee understands what they're referring to. So configurations GG and HH, you'll see here in this diagram, the extended runway center lines have converging flight paths. So this committee should be very familiar with the term CRO, or converging runway operations. These configurations here are not specifically CRO, but they're close. So they're feasible still because we're not in a CRO situation, but there still is these converging flight paths that air traffic is concerned about. And the reason they're concerned about is at night, because we have these converging flight paths, air traffic wants to be able to see both aircraft in the event that the arriving aircraft, for whatever reason, the pilot decides that he's not comfortable with the landing and wants to do a either a go around or a missed approach, something that I've explained in previous tech committees and also in my Airport 201 seminars. So a go around or a missed approach is basically the pilot says he's not comfortable with the landing the way it's going, so he decides he wants to have a do-over, basically. So he flies out and air traffic gives him, there's specific procedures for him if it's a missed approach or if it's a go around, which air traffic would give him vectors back to get in line for arrival. But when that happens, air traffic wants to make sure the departing aircraft is not conflicting with this missed approach or go around. So they want to be able to visually see both aircraft, which means that this configuration, air traffic is only comfortable using when the weather conditions allow them to visually see both aircraft. So in weather conditions like snow events or rain or fog or other conditions that inhibit air traffic from visually being able to see clearly both aircraft, this configuration would not be used. And then the reciprocal over here, 9 center departure and 4 right arrival for the same reason. So again, converging flight paths if there's a missed approach or go around. Air traffic wants to visually be able to see both aircraft to avoid any conflicts in that scenario. Are there any questions about visual only?
We have 2 general questions. I don't know if they're visual only. The problem is I don't want to interrupt your presentation until you're finished. So we have a couple people with questions, unless they're specific toward what Ryan just asked. Can you hold your questions off until after he's done with his presentation? Thank you. Go on, Ryan.
Okay. The next caveat that air traffic gave us for 2 runways was JJ and MM. So configuration JJ has departures on 28 right and arrivals on 22 left. MM has departures on 28 center and arrivals on 22 left. And the concern here is when we are in departing 28 right, the aircraft departure creates what's called a jet blast. When the aircraft is taking off, it goes to full throttle, and there is behind it disturbance of air, as you can imagine, with some of these larger aircraft especially, that may interfere with an arriving aircraft on 22 left. It's unclear if that's the case in both scenarios, 28 center and 28 right. Therefore, if the committee wants to look at one of these configurations and include them in a future alternative, there would be a jet blast analysis required to determine if there is an actual conflict here with the jet blast of the departing aircraft and the arriving aircraft on 22 left. And so a jet blast analysis is, and this is just a sample, this is not at O'Hare or anything, but it is a pretty straightforward analysis, and it's similar to noise contours. However, they're wind, basically blast speed contours. And so you analyze the departing aircraft and determine what the contours are going out to certain miles per hour to determine if there is a conflict behind it, such as equipment on the ground, taxiways, or runways arriving aircraft that this jet blast may cause interference with. And so this is something that we can do. Again, it's not really labor intensive to do, but we would only do it if this committee is interested in these configurations being included in a future alternative. This does require FAA review. And again, FAA is very much willing to commit resources to looking at things like this, but they they've made it clear that they will commit resources, but if it's really made clear that this committee is interested in these configurations. So I think I'll stop there and answer any questions before I move on.
Okay, I just to make sure on the agenda, we have gone through 6, 7, and 8 right now. Is that correct? Is that fair enough?
Yes.
Okay, Cynthia, you're first. Cynthia?
Cynthia, you're muted. Joe, did you want? There she is.
Yeah, let's
Okay,
move on. Well, let's move on to Dan. As soon as Cynthia's ready, she can.
I think we have Cynthia.
Oh, we have her now.
Okay. I apologize. I originally raised my hands during the alternative B feedback. I just had a couple of questions. The first question being that if you take the action to close the south runways at night when the north runways are intended to be active, will you do the same for the north runways when the south runways are active? Because I can see the dynamic changing when we have additional length on the north runways of the cargo and heavy aircraft favoring the north, and somewhat flipping the dynamic that we've had for the last 20 years. So out of the premise of fairness, would that be part of the action to do the same for the north?
Well, the specific comment was in regards to the south airfield, but yes, I envision that that concept would be applied to both north and south. If the city is, if the city, FAA, and others are willing and on board to do it.
Good morning, everyone. It's Aaron Frame. I just want to add to what Ryan said. So we are waiting to hear back and verify that, the north runways 9 center and the extended 9 right would constitute an adequate long runway. Certainly 10 center has been used in the guise of a long runway for a number of years since it opened in 2013. And since both 9 center and the extended 9 right will be longer than that, it is reasonable to make that assumption, but I still need verification from the FAA. So I think, Cynthia, the answer to that question is sort of dependent on the prior question, which is which runways are considered long runways.
Okay, and then I have a kind of a question and a comment on the hybrid runways. Essentially, regardless of what you show the configurations to be, when you have the diagonals active, you have a hybrid airfield because they are going to need a long runway. And we've long said that we can improve that scenario by identifying the appropriate long runway and lend to sharing the burden and removing some of that off the south. So I would just note that we're already in a situation where you're going to have a hybrid configuration, but our recommendation is control that and name the runways as we have designated in our memo that we sent to the committee.
Okay. Next is Dan and then Ernie.
Thank you. Ryan, question specifically on those 2 visual only configurations, realizing that these are intended as primary configurations, and this ties into Cynthia's comment, whether these same considerations would apply with these long runway pairings, which would obviously be much lower demand, but should we assume visual only would reply regardless of the level of utilization in these instances for 28C and 9C, or only as the primary configuration?
Okay, I'm not sure I followed the question, but so you're asking if in these specific configuration, primary configurations, will we still need a third runway?
No, I understand these as primary configurations where for GG 22Rs, the arrival runway, 28Cs to departure.
Actually, that's a typo. That should be 28, right? Sorry about
Okay,
that.
yeah, that's fine. What I'm referring to is these long runway pairings where we need a additional runway for long runway requests specifically for departures. Should we still consider visual only to be the criteria and or hopefully those rare instances where 28R would be requested? In this instance, GG, so presumably 28R would be requested in place of 22L.
Right. That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you. We'll have to talk to air traffic about that.
And then just one comment on the hybrids in general. Our concern with them as primary configurations is it's a pretty heavy burden on the northeast quadrant and the south airfield. There doesn't seem to be a way to weave those into the rotation as primary configurations and still get a balance. So I believe our recommendation is whether the committee wants to consider moving forward with those as primary configurations. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Dan. Ernie's next, and then Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Ryan, I've got a question for you on what was just being discussed with Dan. If you're on a visual only, there won't be a minimum decision altitude, correct?
No.
Or would there?
No,
or there would.
If they could still be using an instrument approach, but for purposes of air traffic, they would need to have the visual conditions. So the arriving aircraft may still be doing an instrument approach and have a minimum decision height, but regardless of how the aircraft is arriving or what method, visual or instrument, air traffic requires the visual conditions so they can see both. Most likely they'll be doing, an instrument approach regardless.
Okay.
But it's air traffic, the air traffic control tower, and the person in the air traffic control tower needs the visual conditions so that they can see the aircraft in order to provide appropriate guidance.
And then my other question is, when can, and I know you can't answer this, but when can we expect a decision from the FAA as to whether or not any of the two runways on the north airfield would be designated as the long runway in weeks that we're using the diagonals?
Well, like you said, I can't answer that. But what I can say is that I believe FAA are providing some feedback and comments. I don't think they're going to give us a definitive, yes, you can do it, or no, you can do it. I think they're, based on discussions, they're going to say, here's what we think, here's some considerations we need to talk about, and go from there. But as far as timeline, I don't know the timeline of that conversation.
Having said that, and I understand that, I asked that question to be rhetorical.
I'm sorry.
No, I know. I mean, I get it. But my concern is, as a committee member, how can we make these decisions on how we're going to operate this airport at night if we don't? We could sit here and talk all day about using the diagonals. As I think probably everybody knows, I've got concerns about using the diagonals because of their short length. And the fact that we have shown with the statistics, forget about recent history when the ILS was out of service on 22. All right, I get it. But even before then, the best utilization that I can see is between 50 and 60% of the time. And in those cases, the long runway was always on the south airfield. My concern is if you tell me that you're going to use either 9 right, 27 left, or 9, 27 center as a long runway, I've got a conflict interest. And I'm not talking about in the air, I'm talking about on the ground. We had enough problems having discussions of moving aircraft from the terminal to maintenance to the GRE and back again. Now we're talking about using long runways on the North Airfield that intersect 22 right, 9 left, or 4 left, excuse me. I'm concerned that is not a workable solution.
All right, Ernie, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. I just want to let everybody know that River Grove and Howard Heights are now part of the committee. They're in attendance now, and Karen is next.
Okay, I just had a few comments. So in regards to the visual only configurations, it seems to me that given our struggles with the diagonals and the fact that we have, I don't know, 30 some odd other configurations, the likelihood of, you know, the weather aligning with our potential rotation and these GG and HH configurations being able to be used consistently is not very high, and that we would be better off focusing on configurations that could provide us with some of the predictability that we're looking for. I understand Ernie's point about the diagonals, but I think that the diagonals in and of themselves do provide some relief to the communities to the east and west of the non-diagonal runways. And so, but when you add visual approach on top of that, or visual only, I think that's just another complication. And so if I'm correct in that we're trying to narrow down what configurations we'd like to see be considered in both our preferred alternative for runway rotation, but also in potential alternate runway rotation configurations, it would be my thought that GG and HH could be set aside. It just seems like they're problematic and that we would likely be frustrated at how infrequently all of the, you know, weather aspects align to allow them to be used in our rotation. So
Karen, it's Aaron Frame with the CDA. Do you feel the same way about the two on the other slide? Ryan has a total of 4 configurations on these 2 slides.
yeah, I mean, I'm a little conflicted about the Jet Blast, just because I understand a visual only. I understand what that means, and I understand weather. From a Jet Blast perspective, I think that, you know, I would look to you all to indicate, you know, if a Jet Blast analysis is going to mean we can't use it, obviously we shouldn't use it. If there's a gray area where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, then I think it does fall into the other 2 scenarios. So I can't really speak to the Jet Blast. I will say from an intersection departure perspective, I agree with whatever the comment was about. I think our preference should always be full runway departures, and then the experts who are managing the airfield can make a determination as to when they feel intersection departures are necessary for the safety of the operations. And so, but I don't think intersection departures should be our default, because I think it takes away opportunities. I mean, look at what we're dealing with now. Like, flight volume is low enough that if we required intersection departures, it's probably not necessary with what we're seeing in terms of flight volumes at night right now, and we'd be boxing ourselves into a restriction that didn't necessarily need to be in place. So, and then I would just say that given some of the last thing I'll say is that in terms of the alternate long runways, you all did a really great presentation for us many months ago now about the runway lengths and configurations at airports around the country, and I believe we even looked at London Heathrow, that have runways that will be comparable to the 2 927 runways on the North Airfield. And so it would seem to me that if the major airlines with large aircraft can use those runways at other airports that aren't as long as our longest runway, it would seem that we should be able to push to get a designated long runway that would alternate between the north and south airfields. And that is all I have to say today. For now, I shouldn't say for today, for now.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Alderman Dunn and then Dan Dwyer.
Yes, thanks, Joe. I just a few comments. I appreciate the thinking outside the box and presenting the hybrid concepts. There's seems to be, but I have some concerns with those in terms of them being more complicated. A lot of the issues that were discussed by Schaumburg and Park Ridge, I agree with. The intersection departure being something that needs to be utilized in some of these hybrids. The jet blast and the visual approach make those a little more complicated. So I have some reservations about those.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Yes, just a very quick comment on the jet blast, the JJ and MM. The other issue with those configurations, in addition to the jet blast and intersection departure, is that 22L arrival corridor. If the committee's using 27C as well, you'd create the only instance where you're overlapping two arrival corridors. And so that's something that should be also considered with those two configurations. Thanks.
Okay, next is Mayor Jersney.
Can you hear me? I think I am muted, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. I think our main concern is for safety, number one, correct? I mean, I'm a proponent of having the north airfield and then using the south, but I don't know how we can do that incorporating the diagonals, because you're going to get this crossover. And if safeties are number one, I know myself, I wouldn't want to be in those planes being faced with the visual only or with the jet blast to even have that chance that could happen. So I would be reluctant to have that crossover. And I think it's just a being more safe and for everyone. We don't need one of those issues to happen. So I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments? If not, thank you, Ryan. You've given us a whole lot of things to think about again. Thanks.
Do we have number 9 now, Chair?
Yes, we're going to do number 9, renaming runway configurations.
So as we're discussing these 30 runway configurations, Aaron would like to take the opportunity to start talking about how we're naming these configurations and making sure that's in line with industry speak, if you will. Some of the verbiage that's been used or we are using is not exactly how FAA or others may refer to these configurations. So Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to take this slide or if you wanted to continue.
Sure, good morning, everyone. So what we're showing you on the screen are 4 of the 30 proposed configurations. Going from left to right, so on the left, you've got configuration Q. You're seeing departures on 27 left and arrivals on 27 center. This is indicative of west flow. Up to this point, we've called it parallel west. One of the things I'd like to do is refine that language as we move forward. I think it's fine to call it configuration Q for right now. We've got 30 configurations on the table for the committee's feedback. But I think if we were to move configuration Q forward, we can refine the name of that and call it something on the bottom, which would be the 27s. I think that name is more specific to what's happening. And I think it also helps more people understand what's going on. And I raise that because if you look at the third box, configuration O has also been referred to as parallel west. The difference is they're parallel runways in an east-west direction on the south airfield. So one of the other problems I think we need to consider is that if you have multiple configurations called parallel west, that's going to get a bit confusing. You're going to say, oh, we're on parallel west. And then the next question is obviously going to be, well, which parallel west? And so similarly for the third box, where we're using the south airfield, departures on 28 right and arrivals on 28 center, I would propose to call that the 28s. Now, similarly, for the second and the fourth box, you've essentially got the opposite configurations in an easterly flow, and it stands to reason that the second box that we would have called parallel east, we can just call it the 9s. And similarly for the fourth box, that's another. Someone have a question?
You said he called them 9s, it's 10s, no?
Good morning, Mayor. So on the second box for configuration P, you can see where we're departing on runway 9 right, arriving on 9 center. And so that configuration in the second box, we would propose to call the 9s. For the fourth box, the one on the far right, yes, we would call that the 10s, where we're departing 10 left and arriving on 10 center. And essentially, you can see from left to right, each of these is refining the name to be more specific to the runways we're actually using, right? We don't need to be as generic as calling it parallel west when we can be more specific and say we're on the 27s. So if we said that for the box on the left, everybody would know that the 27s are on the north airfield, and they would know that we're always in west flow. So what I'd like to do is transition this nomenclature. I just wanted to introduce this idea to the committee today. Like I said earlier, I do think it's fine to keep referring to these configurations with the letter or the double letter. You know, Q, P, O, and M is fine for now. We've still got 30 on the table and we need to whittle this down. But as we start putting them in a rotation pattern, I'd like to move on from this terminology of parallel west and east and diagonal west and east. One of the other things that I haven't said yet is that, let's be honest, all the runways are diagonal. They're all parallel. They're just not parallel to each other. The 422s, which we often call the diagonals, those are parallel runways. They're just not parallel to the east-west runways. So, you know, even just using the term parallels is a bit open-ended because you've got, or we will have 6 runways that are parallel in an east-west and 2 runways which are parallel in a southwest-northeast configuration. So again, I just wanted to introduce this concept today, and I'd like to carry it forward for future meetings. Chairman, do you have any questions?
Are there any questions? I have none. Thank you, Aaron. It's always important that we keep clarifying what we're doing here, as to not to confuse what we say to other people. With that, are there any comments? What?
If I can, yeah, Chair, if I can add on one more piece.
Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to, just a last piece to talk about moving forward. I think we had some really good momentum coming out of the last meeting, and I want to continue that momentum. And so the next committee meeting, I would like to present some new configurations, I'm sorry, not configurations, alternatives, possibly one or even more. Our thought is, as we go through this process, we're going to have multiple alternatives for this committee to deliberate on. And so based on the feedback we received today, which has been great feedback, and some of the things we've talked about today, we're going to present at least I'm envisioning presenting an additional alternative, let's call it C, and maybe even a D, so that the committee can start to weigh the pros and cons of different concepts and get this whittled down to hopefully a preferred alternative in the near future.
I think that's a great idea.
And in addition, we've been talking a lot about intersection departures. I want to do in an upcoming meeting focus also on intersection departures and specifically where the FAA is saying they should be from, and to give the committee some idea of, with intersection departures, here's the runway lengths that we're talking about being used, where they're taking off from, and potential considerations. So that's another topic I would like to talk more about. And again, if there's anything the committee would like to see or discussed in future meetings, please, reach out through Jeanette and the chair and vice chair so that we can, keep the conversation going and moving forward.
All right, thank you. We have two questions. First from Dan.
Yeah, sorry, this was just backing up a little bit to the renaming, just to understand whether these would only apply to the split airfield concepts, or is there going to be something similar for the full airfield configurations?
Ryan, can you pull up the list of 30 or the diagram with the 30 airfield? So Dan, can you do me a favor? Can you give me an example of a configuration that you're thinking about?
We'll just pick like X, for example.
All right, let me find X really quickly. Okay, there it is. Yeah, I think that's an example where previously X is in the lower right-hand corner of the page. That's an example where we would have previously called that parallel east, and that's a good example where you have one operation on a 10 and another operation on a 9. So that is going to need a more refined name. I think, Dan, what I'd like to do is get further along with the committee to determine which of these 30 are going to get carried forward in any alternative, whether it's alternatives B, C, or D. And then once we settle on what are the final answers, then I think we would try to come up with more specific names. So we can continue to call it X, and yes, it is a easterly flow direction, but yes, we'd like to refine the names for ultimate rollout in a future meeting.
Okay, because we were a little bit focused, if the FAA doesn't yield on intersection departures, there still are full airfield configurations that don't require that consideration.
Correct.
We wouldn't want those necessarily to be eliminated this early in the game. X and Z
Correct.
are two examples of that. So thank you.
Correct. So my goal is simply to refine the names as we get farther along. I think the configurations themselves, all 30 of them, they all have their merits. Some have less restrictions than others, as you mentioned, and X is one of them. And so I don't want the naming to get in the way of the merit of the configuration.
Okay, thank you.
Ernie, you're next.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning again, everyone. Joe, I'll throw this question back to you first. In regards to the FAA, and Ryan, you can chime in, or Aaron, you can also, please. In regards to the FAA coming back to us and making a decision whether or not the long designated runway during the use of diagonals would ever be on the north airfield, do we, have we, or should we have a motion to make that decision happen? Do we have to do something as a committee?
No, Ernie, this is Aaron. I don't think so. Your point is valid. We do need to re-engage with the FAA. I will raise that with them. I'm due to check in with the FAA staff myself because we do need to get this question answered about, is the utility of the 9 center and 9 right, extended 9 right, are those usable? That's an important answer, and we need to know that for planning purposes. So I think you're fine for now. I will take that as a homework assignment to check in with the FAA and see if we can advance that item a little farther.
All right.
Thank you. And I've got one other question, Joe.
Yeah.
And this will be directed to Ryan. Did I understand you correctly, Ryan, that this committee, if we want to look at alternatives that don't include the diagonals, that you need a motion to that effect?
Yes,
in
yes.
other words, do you need us to direct you to say, give me an alternative that doesn't include the diagonals?
The answer is yes. This is
Yes.
the committee has already voted that the criteria include 6 specific runways. So yes, we can consider additional options, but since the committee's already voted, I need the committee to take another vote to say, yeah, we're going to relax, this criterion number 2 and consider other things, right? Because at the end of the process, we want alternatives that meet the committee's goals and criteria. And if we need to tweak something, that's fine. But since the committee's already voted, we need to have clear direction to look at other options.
Ernie, you do have an issue there because it is one of the criteria. So tell me if I'm wrong. If we were going to change the criteria, it would have to go back to the full board. I mean, those criteria were established by the full board. Is that correct? I'm trying to remember.
That's a good
It was years
question.
ago.
Yeah, Chair. I don't quite remember.
Well, we'll look into that and we'll find out because if this whole concept of not using the diagonals is pursued, it's one thing to discuss it. It's another thing to have it actually voted on. I believe we're going to have to change the criteria, and the question is, if the criteria was established by the full board.
My recollection, it was just this committee, but
It was just this committee. The full
It's
board
just
had
the
no
com-
input.
No,
It's
it
just
was
the committee.
board. The committee did it.
Okay. Well, so then the committee, before we can have any real, I mean, we could have a discussion on it, Ernie, but if we want to get specific about not using the diagonals, we're going to have to change the criteria first.
Joe, that's why I asked. I just wanted to make sure by talking with Ryan, and if this committee decides that the diagonals should not be included in the rotation, is that needed by a formal motion? I have my answer, and so we'll take that up at a different time. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, it's Karen. I guess I would just say, Ernie, if it's your intention to revisit that criteria, I'd rather do it sooner rather than later so that we can move forward accordingly, because I don't want this committee and Landerman Brown and CDA to be putting a ton of effort in if we're going to change the criteria and really the trajectory of what we're working on. And so I'll defer to Joe in terms of the appropriate timing of that. I would just request that if that's the direction we're heading in, let's have the discussion and take the vote and make a determination so that we can keep our forward progress going.
Evan, you've
Karen?
had your hand raised.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's good to be recognized. Thank you.
I was going to do that, Evan, but they weren't finished yet.
Okay. All right. Sure, Joe. Thank you. And it doesn't matter. I guess my point, what I want to put in today is I feel like we're getting bogged down again. And we had such great forward progress with alternative B that Ryan presented. And then Ryan's early slide was everyone's comments. I would like to, at the next meeting, hopefully, let's start assembling everyone's comments and start tweaking alternate B. Make those small tweaks that are important and push that plan forward. The beauty, the elegance in alternate B is its simplicity. It works. We can make it work. So I think to make it work, we need to get some direction from CDA if we can designate a long runway. And then also if we can get the long runways closed on a nightly basis. So Aaron, how do we get that closure question answered? Because that is kind of predicates alternate B's success.
Good morning, Evan. I agree. As I mentioned, I will reach out to the FAA and see if I can get a meeting scheduled with them so that we can advance that topic. I agree. We need to get that question answered.
Is that an FAA decision? I thought it was a CDA decision. You guys make pavement available to the FAA.
To be honest, it's a joint decision between the FAA, the airlines, and the city. The city is willing to make the pavement open or not open, as we already do in our normal Fly Quiet program. I just need additional direction, that the FAA is comfortable with that and they would understand, the scenarios under which we would operate the airfield. And we want to get concurrence from the airlines because at the end of the day, it's the airlines that are using this program. So I think it's a collaborative effort, but to your point, I need to re-engage with the FAA and start with them.
Okay. I think that you just need, at that table of the FAA, the airlines, and the CDA, I just want to make sure that ONCC is also at that table and the concerns of our residents are being heard. So it's, okay. I'll take that. Do you need a letter from the ONCC to try to get that moving?
Nope, you're good.
That's all in frame all day?
This open meeting is just what we need.
All right. Well, I would encourage you to go down that route. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, next we have Cynthia, Ron, and then Dennis.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Yeah, I would echo and reinforce everything that Evan just said from Bensonville. And I would request respectfully, Aaron, when you go forward to the FAA, with alternative B in mind, we recommend pairing the 9s with departures on 4 left. And we recommend pairing the 10s with departures on 22 left. And everybody needs to understand that these are alternate configurations. They are not primary. So the safety considerations that the air traffic control tower is going to implement in those scenarios are used during the day. There are abilities to manage that in an alternate situation that are better than, say, having it in a primary configuration. So just to narrow down the scope of what the FAA needs to look at, there's way too many configurations that would impose restrictions, but we would respectfully ask that you bring those 2 forward when you go visit with them. Secondly, I'd like to ask about timing for the next meeting is not until August 20th. If CDA and Landerman Brown are going to be developing alternative C and D, we'd like to see those, I think, before August and maybe disseminate those so people can discuss it if it's going to happen. I'm with Evan. I think alternative B is the premium alternative, the fairest share of noise, and simplest for the air traffic tower to use and implement efficiently and repeatedly, so would result in the most relief. But if you're going to bring other alternatives to the table, it would be nice to see them before August 20th.
If I could just add something, alternative B seems to be the alternative that people are most interested in. But on the other hand, I don't want to leave any stone unturned, unasked, or unanswered before we start making our final decisions. I don't want that to happen because I don't want anybody to walk away from this and say, and disown it because they feel that they didn't get an opportunity to say what they felt. Okay? Having said that,
Joe,
makes
hold
it
on.
more difficult. And Evan, I don't know if you realize or not, but I think since the beginning, that's what we have been doing, giving everybody an opportunity to ask whatever question they wanted to ask, having to do with what we're doing, and at the same time, narrowing the focus of the question. Okay?
And Joe, we could analyze this. This is the most complicated airport in the world. We could analyze this for the rest of our lives, and there will still be stones that are left unturned. Meanwhile, we are not providing our residents relief. We are in a nighttime configuration that is broken and doesn't work. We need to call the question and push this forward.
I appreciate that, but if this is going to be the next thing, if this is going to be the final configurations until at least for the next 10 years, I just want to make sure everybody is walking away feeling some sort of satisfaction. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I, for one, am not feeling satisfaction in a bogged down world where we're in a configuration that doesn't work. That does not satisfy.
Thank you for your comment. I'll take that under advisement too. We have, let's see, we have Ron.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a comment on some of the discussions about the FAA and waiting on their decision. Given the history that the FAA has on giving us decisions, we could be sitting here for 6 to 9 months waiting on them to tell us whether they think the North Airfield can suffice as a long runway, when in reality, they're not the ones that make that decision. It's the airline that makes the decision as to how long of a runway they need. So I would recommend that CDA put their focus on talking with the airlines that may need the longer runways at night to see if they can work with the 11,000 plus length that you're going to have on the north runway versus waiting on the FAA. I can already tell you what the FAA is going to come back. They're going to say that, yeah, it may work at some point, but you really need that 13,000 foot open down there at the bottom, the southern runway, just in case someone needs it, when they're not the ones that make the decision. It's the airline that makes the decision. So I think the CDA really should focus on meeting with the airlines that might need it. And you might get an answer much quicker than you will waiting on the FAA.
Okay. Dennis?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry I was a little late today. I was had some village business I took care of this morning. I think when we do our final consideration on this, we must keep the most important thing in our mind is safety. And if those diagonals are going to have a safety problem, I think I'll have to agree that it's best to take them off the table. That's my only thought on that. Thank you.
Okay, Fran. You want to ask a question?
Actually, it's Mayor Police's had his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're going backwards talking about now getting rid of the diagonals. So we want to make a motion, get rid of diagonals. I want to make a motion, get rid of south runway. We're going to start that all over again. We're moving forward. I mean, we've got alternative B. If we're going to start making motions like getting rid of runways after months of discussions, we're just going backwards. This should be collaborative effort, trying to disperse the noise throughout the entire airport. That's all I got to say.
Mayor, may I make a suggestion? And anybody who, I mean, I understand the problem that we have here, believe me. I think off the record discussions with each other might help move this process along a little bit so that when we all get together, we don't spend 2 hours discussing something that we've already talked about forever. Okay?
Right.
Evan, call Ernie up and talk to him if you want, okay? Seriously. And see if you can come to some sort of compromise or something. Karen, do the same. Mayor, do the same. Because I don't want any stone unturned, but on the other hand, I don't want this to drag on forever. We don't have forever.
Right.
2 years ago, a very similar plan to alternate B was presented to this group. We've spent 2 years beating this and turning stones, and alternate B is a beautiful design. It should work, and let's just, I don't know how much longer we're gonna have these meetings.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, can I make one quick comment? Everyone keeps talking about the diagonals presenting safety issues because they cross runways. Chicago's not the only airport in the world that has crossing runways. Just look south to Midway. All their runways cross, and it works just fine. Just because runways cross doesn't mean you can't use them. For some reason, Chicago, for O'Hare, seems to have this idea that you can't use crossing runways because it's a safety issue. Well, there are many airports all over the world that have crossing runways, and it works just fine. So you can't go into this thinking that just because runways cross, it's not going to work.
Yeah, this is Aaron, everyone. I would agree with Ron. You know, the northern crosswind, which is 4 left, 2 right, has been there since the 1940s. It's one of the original runways left on the airfield. And, you know, while the OMP desires to reduce the number of intersecting runways, as you know, we're not eliminating them because we do have weather conditions that necessitate those crosswind runways. So I would agree with Ron.
Okay. All right. I think the last thing I'd like to make a comment on myself is everybody, please let's not start getting too parochial. We're trying to do the best we can for everybody as best we can, given the entire situation. So let's not start getting parochial about, well, if you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. Let's work this out. We will. We have since 2015, for crying out loud. And it's not going to change. I'm not going to let it change unless you guys want another chairman. which would hurt my feelings. And I know you don't want to hurt my feelings. Are there any other comments from the audience?
Joe.
Yes. Joe? Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the alternate B. It's an observation more than a comment. Of all the plans that have been presented with parallel runways and east-west flow and everything, alternate B is the only one that's good except for jet blast, visual only requirements, and intersecting runways. So with those three things in mind, I think it should be discussed. I said, I think Ernie's point is extremely valid for safety purposes, if nothing else. Another thing, you just stated that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
if I can. Another thing, you just stated that people should talk off record about this. I am totally opposed to that, both as a commission member and as a resident and a stakeholder in this whole thing. Backroom deals come from people talking off record. And I don't need to preach to anybody about what backroom deals have done to Chicago and the airports and everything else. I know you didn't imply that, Joe. It's just, it's where it leads. So
I'm seeking a compromise between a couple of members that need to work it out. And there's nothing wrong with two people talking to each other.
no, but
There's no such thing as a backroom deal is we made a decision here without telling anybody in this committee. That's a backroom deal. There's nothing wrong with people talking to each other. And I strongly urge everybody to talk to each other. That's all I have to say about that.
Joe, Schiller Park.
Schiller Park, yes.
Okay, Joe, I agree with you. We should look at all our options. Schiller Park agrees with the alternative of B. We like it, but we don't know what the future might hold if we keep investigating other options. Okay, so I think we should continue looking at more options, just to pick the right one. We're not going to find a plan that's best for everyone. We're not going to find that. We're going to find a plan that's good for everyone. So I think we should continue looking at options.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there isn't any other discussion, I guess I'm not going to see you guys next month. The next ONCC Fly Quiet Committee meeting is August 20th, 2020. And we don't know, at 9:30, we don't know where it's going to be yet. It depends on, I suppose, the coronavirus. Having said that, it's always fun talking to you guys. Have a great summer.
We need a motion and a second and a roll call to adjourn the meeting.
I was just going to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Second? All right, do the roll call.
Thank you. Bentonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Aye.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice summer.
Take care, Joe.
Joe.
Everybody be well, please.
Jeanette, thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey.